everyone. This is John Daly. I'm here with another episode of the Daily Express. My guest today is one of my favorite political analysts. She's a straight shooter, and she's a very nice person who I'm proud to call a friend. You can read her work and listen to her podcast over at the Bulwark. I'm talking about A.B. Stoddard. Welcome to the show, A.B.
Oh, thanks for having me back, John.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining me. When I invited you onto the show a couple of weeks ago, the news cycle was relatively boring compared to what it's been like over the past week or so. A lot has happened, including the assassination attempt on Donald Trump. There was a lot of political finger pointing in the wake of that terrible event, but there were also some calls for unity and for people to lower the temperature on our political discourse, including from President Biden and Donald Trump himself. AB, is anything really going to change as a result of these calls? I feel like there are a lot of things that would have to change in our politics to even begin the process.
Yeah, I think that people can go to the Truth Social website and find some posts from Donald Trump from the last 48 hours where he's back at it. So it didn't last very long. He, of course, has used what I would call dangerous rhetoric throughout his political career. It's part of the appeal to his base. Alternatively, though I think it's wonderful that Joe Biden called Donald Trump on Saturday night, offered him his prayers, spoke 3 times, including an Oval Office address, and was emphatic about how in a democracy there is no place for political violence. I just don't know at this point, who's listening to Joe Biden. So it's a very fraught moment because I don't know that the Republicans are taking it seriously. I don't know that Joe Biden breaks through. And then I am kind of, frustrated at Marjorie Taylor Greene telling reporters they got Trump assassinated and people blaming it on Joe Biden characterizing Trump as a threat to democracy because there's no evidence that this kid, who is another, broken-hearted, bullied mess, who gets an AR and does something terrible and kills people, there's no evidence that he was radicalized by the way that Democrats talk about Donald Trump. So it's a toxic conversation in some quarters, and it's unhelpful. And then I think the people who are trying to help aren't really, making a difference. And then I think Trump has kind of moved on. I mean, the convention, they redid their speeches, they made an attempt. They're feeling great, Republicans, and they feel really unified at their convention. And I think that's the way the country feels. I think that Trump feels like a messiah. I mean, I think he feels chosen, and people all around him are telling him that. And so there's a moment of, I don't know, some kind of quasi serenity, I would guess. But he is back to saying things in his posts, and again, we have a short attention span in this country, and I really wonder even if by this weekend people will be really thinking about someone getting killed at a Trump rally last Saturday. It's just hard to know what kind of long-term effect it'll have.
Yeah, I agree. I feel it is strange because that wasn't, that was less than a week ago that happened, and it just feels like it's that part of it's just sort of fading to the background. Similar to you kind of described Joe Biden, he's sort of in the background, and you're not sure anybody's listening to him as well. But yeah, it is the attention spans. We just move on from one thing to another, and it seems like they're getting even shorter over time. Another thing that happened this week, Donald Trump chose his vice presidential candidate, J.D.Vance, the senator from Ohio. AB, do you think Vance was selected because Trump wanted a vice president who would serve as a reliable defender of the Constitution, someone who would push back on Trump's worst instincts and provide sound, independent advice?
So Trump was never going to pick anybody who would push back on his worst instincts. And I think there are so many reasons he picked J.D. Vance. Excuse me. One, J.D. Vance is like a bro who Trump gets along with. J.D. Vance, is sucks up to him and is good friends with Don Jr. and is really sort of, at least it's either a fake conversion or he's fully converted, but he's MAGA through and through, and he talks the talk better than anybody. Trump loves that. He's good looking. Trump loves that. Um, he's a Marine. He has a wonderful American story of overcoming, hardship and becoming this really very smart, successful person. So I think that there's so much in terms of Trump's central casting criteria that he takes very seriously, um, that helped J.D. Vance overcome just a year and a half in the Senate or whatever he's had. But um, there are downsides. It's a pick that Trump made because Trump is confident he's going to win. And he didn't feel that he had to pick a Nikki Haley or a Todd Burgum or a Marco Rubio to calm people down. Trump is going to do whatever he wants in a second term. J.D. Vance will let him do whatever he wants. J.D. Vance will not be upset and have a crisis of conscience about it. He is going to, he wants to inherit the empire, right? So in so many ways, it's so Trumpian. It makes so much sense. It makes the establishment nauseous. It's terrified our allies. It's so Trumpian. So I did expect that JD would be high on the list. I knew that Marco Rubio would make Trump. He would kind of show him up. In some ways, JD Vance shows Trump up, but not. I think he'll be very, very savvy about making sure he doesn't, if that makes sense. He'll be out there making the case in a very articulate way, and people around Trump talk so much about J.D. Vance and how articulate he is. So he'll be selling MAGA and Trumpism and defending Trump very well as a campaigner. But I think he's going to make sure there are no glowing articles and profiles about him being the inheritor. And the idea, I think that, I don't know where you are, John. I don't think that the VP to Donald Trump will be groomed on day one to become president in 2028. They'll sort of pretend that that's happening, but he will not be securing a power base and being a threat to Donald Trump on day one, the way that a proper transition would be taking place, right? The way that a 39-year-old man who's going to be 40 before he becomes vice president, should Trump win, and I think he will, in a normal world, right? J.D. Vance would have to be prepped up from day one to become the likely president, step in at any time to be president, because he's serving with a 78-year-old and then, or 79-year-old, and then right, and then be ready for the presidency in a couple of years, right? So we're not going to see that. That's not going to be. J.D. Vance is going to make sure that the attention stays on Trump, and Trump doesn't believe that he needs a vice president, and he's made that clear. So this is like, right, this is like a box checking thing. So it's interesting. I think he does help Trump with young people. I mean, I think he does, but at the same time, really, are there nervous, like fence-sitting suburban moms in Michigan who just didn't know if they could support Donald Trump, who are now like, well, this is so awesome. J.D. Vance is his VP, so now I can definitely support him. I don't really think so.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think he brings a lot, but I don't, may not hurt. I think young people. That's a good point that you brought up. It was interesting when all these different prospects for the vice presidential spot were really trying to. They were all kind of falling over each other, trying to get Trump's attention and suck up as hard as they could. He was one of the people that Vance, he outright admitted when asked about what he would have done as vice president on January 6th. He said he basically admitted he wouldn't have followed the Constitution. He wouldn't have certified the election, as Mike Pence did do these things. I thought that was pretty extraordinary. I don't know. Do you think that's going to be something the Democrats really focus on? There's quite a few there's quite a few. There's some baggage there for sure. I worry about Ukraine, that situation with the Trump Vance ticket. Trump is so pro-Putin. Vance loathes Ukraine. Um, and I think there's that famous clip with Vance saying he doesn't really care what happens to Ukraine either way. Are those things, do you think the Democratic Party is gonna latch onto, or what do you think?
Okay, so the Democrats will definitely, latch on to the fact that, excuse me, that Vance is a pro-Putin Republican who wants to abandon the Ukrainians and blames, right? Everyone's blaming NATO for, like, right? NATO was going to expand and potentially include Ukraine, so Putin had no other choice but to invade Ukraine. So that is going to be, the Democrats will definitely. I don't know that obviously Biden's the best messenger, but the Democrats are going to use that, and they're going to divide the Republican Party over it, because we just saw Mike Johnson risk his political career to send security aid to Ukraine. We know that there are still people in the party supporting Trump, but who believe that this is essential. And that's a real rift in the party, a real wedge, and so they will definitely use that. We know that Ukraine support polls well with swing voters, and is really only opposed within sort of, the base of the Republican Party at significant levels. And so that is an issue. I actually saw the interview that you're talking about in real time, and it's so radical and terrifying. When Vance, as you note, was asked about whether or not he would have done the same thing if he was Trump's VP on January 6, 2021, he said that he would not have, and he said that that the alternate electors should have just gone to Congress, and Congress should have fought it out, which is a constitutional crisis unlike anything that we can really imagine what that looks like, where it would have taken us. So that is terrifying, and I hope, that the Democrats make sure that if Biden is their candidate, which is a fatal error, that they have people, going after Vance on that front, because that's so deeply dangerous and it's so radical.
Yeah, no, I agree. Over at the Bulwark, I was gonna get to the last topic here. JBL and Sarah Longwell, they do this shtick where they talk about which one of them is always right. It's sort of their trademark thing. I would argue, AB, that you are always right. And I'd say that for a few reasons. So I remember back in the fall of 2020, I was out on Twitter. You may not even remember this, but I was on Twitter kind of poo-pooing the idea at the time that Trump would try to stay in office if he had lost the election.
Oh,
You saw that and you emailed me. You said something along the lines of, "Are you sure about that? Because that's a real concern I have." And you were absolutely right. I was totally wrong on that. But you were also right. You were one of the very first political commentators out there loudly saying that Joe Biden should absolutely not run for reelection. I think you were saying that as far back as 2022, maybe even
it's
longer.
2 years. It's 2 years this
Yeah, and
month.
really everybody sees that now, even if there are some that don't want to admit it. Um, do you feel vindicated, and how depressed are you that you were right?
So what's so frustrating, John, for all of us who believe that Trump should not have a second term, is that the polling was evident by the end of 2021 that people had supported Joe Biden. Then they were mad about Afghanistan, but they thought he was good on the vaccine rollout, but they thought he was good on some other things, but he was getting too old for the job. And then that carries through 2022. And so by the summer of 2022, when I first wrote that he, whether he knew it or not, could not run for reelection, it was untenable. The voters, whether he liked it or not, the way he talked and the way he walked had disqualified him. That polling on him being too old for the job grows throughout 2022 and throughout 2023, and it's growing now, obviously, even before the debate. And then now he's completely written off. So it's really tough for someone who said he was going to be a bridge, a transitional figure, um, to have ignored that polling and to have dug in. And you can either, I mean, you have to, right, the blame has to go to Joe Biden because he either created a myopic environment where people can't really tell him the truth, or he's told the truth and he's ignoring it. But it has, right? So it is just on him, and it's on his wife, who I'm really frustrated with because she knows everything. And if Joe can't see that he's declining, because if you have cognitive decline, maybe you're not aware of how out of it you look when you're out of it, but when you're with it that you're doing pretty well. And you could see it as you could see, I don't know if you watched the press conference after NATO. I mean, he was there. Trump could have never done what Joe Biden did in that press conference. He went around the world, uh, um, uh, the conflict in the Middle East, the Ukraine war, the re-weaponization of NATO. We need a new industrial policy in the West. I mean, Trump could never have done this. And you could see in Joe Biden's face, like, he was like, I'm with it. Like, I'm doing this. He was like chuckling and giggling. And I was really happy for him that he still has those moments. But that has nothing to do with the fact that he melted down on TV and his brain escaped him and everyone has written him off. So I'm not feeling vindicated. I'm just feeling furious. And it's really tough because that polling, it's fairly rare that you get sort of a unanimity in polling, something like a data point so overwhelming. And it wasn't overwhelming in numbers the way it is now, but it was always too big and it always was growing. And so, duh, is kind of the way I feel. And I thought that Joe Biden, I know you heard me say this on like Jonah's Goldberg. I mean, I believed that he's a man who knows fate has dealt him so many blows. And I believed that he was going to step aside. And on that, I was so wrong. I believed that he knew that it was time. And I'm stunned that he stayed.
Yeah, it's crazy. And I remember I agreed with you way back then. I didn't write a whole lot about it because I was still, maybe I'm wrong. But it's do you is technically there are a couple weeks left, I guess, where he can drop out. Is there any chance that's actually going to happen? Is anything going to break through to this man to give the Democrats a real shot at winning?
So I'm referring to some papers here because there is interesting news out this morning that a Blue Labs analytics memo is that Jonathan Martin of Politico has reported on is circulating that shows, first of all, they have the internal polling that shows that he's purpling up blue states. Joe Biden's fraught polling position is threatening the Democrats in New Mexico, Virginia, New Hampshire, and Minnesota and places like that. So that is the kind of wave election that would wipe out the Senate and the House, the prospects for the Democrats in Senate and House. And it's important to note that Democrats in the competitive Senate races, not red state Democrat races, so not Sherrod Brown and not John Tester in Montana, but in the others, in Pennsylvania, Nevada, Michigan, Wisconsin, those races, the Democrats are all doing very much better than the Republican candidates, and then Joe Biden is doing much worse than them. But in a wipeout scenario, they won't. I mean, the Republicans are likely to have Trump coattails, right? So this memo from Blue Labs Analytics it was 15,000 voters in 7 battleground states, and it shows that Kamala Harris and all the other alternatives poll better than Joe Biden by an average of 3 points, but she does the worst of the alternatives. So the need for a fresh face and the appeal of a fresh face with double haters who are now making up between 20 and 25% of the electorate, right? So like 1 in 4 of us, between 1 and 4.5 of us, dreads this rematch and doesn't want to choose either one. So Trump or Biden. So the strongest potential candidates are Mark Kelly, Wes Moore, Josh Shapiro, and Gretchen Whitmer in alphabetical order, but they don't list which one is the favorite. but by roughly 5 points across battleground states. And so that is consistent with Sarah Longwell, our publisher at the Bulwark's, her focus groups, which are finding that double haters are like literally anybody. Give us anybody. It's not a mystery, that anyone stepping in and saying, it's been really great that Joe Biden served this nation and, united the West against Vladimir Putin, brought us out of COVID, passed more bipartisan legislation with no margins in the, chambers. You can run, he can't run on his record. They can run on his record on the best parts of it. They can talk differently about inflation with more empathy and less defensiveness. And they can say Trump's too old. It's so simple. So the problem is the machine of the Democratic Party is protecting Biden.
Right.
And so to answer your question, after all of that, is there time? I mean, if Pelosi and Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries and people who have met with Biden and basically said, like, you're in deep waters, man, they have not endorsed the idea of him continuing to run, but they've met with him. If they push him out, there's time. But if they don't do it soon, and he runs out the clock and does this virtual nomination roll call thing before the DNC begins on August 18th, then I guess technically there's not. So there's a real struggle going on right now. I mean, wild conversations are taking place, like as you and I speak. Unheard of, historical, like confrontations. It's amazing. And we'll see where it goes. But I think there's definitely still time. And the numbers are there. I mean, in favor of taking the big risk, right? Like everyone says it's so risky. I think going on to certain defeat is pretty dumb at this point.
Yeah, I think there's a lot more risk in keeping things where they're at right now.
Yeah.
And going with Joe Biden. Well, Amy, I really appreciate all this insight and you taking time to talk to me today. I know you have some other things you got to rush off to. So I want to thank you for joining me on the Daily Express. As always, I always appreciate your outlook on things.
It's great to be with you, John, and I will be with you again before November 5, I'm sure.
Excellent. Thank you. I appreciate that. Have a great day, Amy.
You too. Thanks.